Ladies and gentlemen, may I please ask you to take a seat? We're going to begin. May I request all of you to please stand up? We are going to have a 1-minute silence. I think all of you know. I don't need to specify. Please stop serving khana pina for 1 minute. Our time starts. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. The Mumbai Research Center of the Asiatic Society, Mumbai, welcomes you all this evening. Today's speaker, Dr. Kulkarni, is a trained surgeon. He has served in the Indian Armed Forces and proceeded on voluntary retirement at the rank of Sergeant Commander. He has received many awards for his work on Maratha and Indian history. He is an elected fellow of the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and Ireland. He has been awarded the Shri Shivaji Raigarh Puruskar and the Abba Saheb Mazumdar Puruskar. He has lectured in English, Marathi, and Hindi at several places and written columns for Sakal, Pune Mirror, DNA, and Swarajya. He has spoken at several literature festivals at Pune, Mumbai, Delhi, Pondicherry, Bhopal, Jaipur, Sitamau, and so on. Dr. Uday Kulkarni has authored several non-fiction books dealing with 18th century Indian history over the last 14 years, namely Solstice as Panipat, the era of Bajirao, Bhakkar of Panipat, the extraordinary epoch of Nana Saheb Peshwa, the Maratha century, and the mastery of Hindustan, triumphs and travails of Madhav Rao Peshwa, all of which cover the period from the late 17th century onwards. He's also authored a richly illustrated book based on the works of the Scottish artist James Wales and has examined Western India of late 18th century through the eyes of this painter in James Whale, artist and antiquarian in the times of Peshwa Savai Madhav Rao. 4 of his books have been translated into Marathi by Vijay Bapaye. The latest work takes the story forward. Raghoba is a standalone book about the tragic events in the heart of Maratha power. Dr. Kulkarni has unearthed several unpublished documents of Maratha history from libraries in the UK, USA, and India, as well as original maps that are being published from time to time. Now, Dr. Gaurav Gadgil works as an associate professor in the School of Civilization at Somaya Vidyavihar University in Mumbai. He is a research-oriented academician with 15 years of experience and a wide array of interests, which spans from political and cultural history to literary history to international relations. Dr. Gadgil has been an invited speaker at prestigious institutions like National Center for Performing Arts, Mumbai, University of Baroda, Asiatic Society of Bengal, Calcutta University, Nagpur Literary Festival, among others. So may I please request Dr. Surgeon Uday Kulkarni to please come ahead, and Dr. Gadgil, please. Thank you. Going to start from here, or you're going to? Okay.
Thank you, Mrs. Darbar, for the nice introduction, and thanks all of you for being here today on such a warm day in Mumbai. And the topic for today is rather unusual because not many people speak about this period. It's a region which is restricted by a very small area, actually, suburbs of Bombay as they are known today. And but their past is very fascinating, and it's a long story. It is impossible to cover all the minute details of what all happened at that time, and but we'll give a broad outline of what exactly happened in those years. Now the story is violent and it's often very communal, and at various levels in our public life we try to sanitize it in our textbooks also for obvious reasons. However, the very motive for this long and bloody campaign in Salsette and Vasai in the mid-18th century was religion. History is often grey, and rarely it is stark. You can see it in black and white. It is rather rare. However, in the story we are about to embark on, it is dark and bloody. It is communal. And in the case of the campaign against the Portuguese held Sasti or Salsette and Vasai, it is even more so. From the very beginning, if you see, the aim of the Maratha state was to liberate the Hindus from the yoke of oppression, and besides fighting the Mughals and later invaders like Ahmad Shah Abdali, this campaign against the Portuguese qualifies as yet another leaf from history where the Maratha campaign was provoked by religious persecution by the Portuguese. This was not just destruction of temples or additional taxes. However, one interesting tax which I should mention is called the Shendi tax. Anybody who kept a tuft of hair signifying his religion was expected to pay 8 rupees for it. So this was it's a systematic persecution at various levels, which I don't want to delve too much into the details because the Inquisition, I think everybody knows, and that Inquisition from the 15th century carried on well into the 18th century, though it kind of became milder as the years went by. Again, we have to look at history as a story. That's why I labeled it as the story of Sasti and Vasai. And therefore, it's easier to comprehend rather than giving it as a didactic lecture. And this is also not very well known. Therefore, I felt it would be worthwhile speaking on this often ignored subject. Now, Vasai immediately brings to mind the name of Chimaji Appa. Yet he is not so well known. No picture exists of this man. All we have is a statue in the fort of Vasai, put up a few years back, and a small samadhi at Pune, where he passed away in 1740. Unlike the mausoleums you are accustomed to see in Delhi and Agra and such other places, we have very little to show what Chimaji Appa means to 18th century history. An 18th century Bakhar very matter-of-factly says, the Firangis took Thane and Konkan and held evil intentions. They took the Watans away and converted village after village to Christianity. In the 66 villages, 66 is the reason why it is called Sasti. In the 66 villages and in Vasai, people were caught and converted. With the father's dead bodies still lying in the house, they would take away the children and convert them. Such a nuisance they began in Maharashtra. Some ran away to the south. All rituals were ended. The prayer of God was finished. Temples were destroyed. And in their place, the Firangis built their own temples. The religion of the Firangis was supreme. No Brahmin was allowed to stay in the land. If anybody did any religious ritual at home, he and his neighbors who attended it were all caught, detained, and allowed to rot in prisons. Such a disaster happened. Now, this was not just destruction of temples or additional taxes, etc., but it was also much more than that. You can see several, if you go to Mandapeshwar, for example, near Kaneri, you can see how the temple was destroyed and church built, and which later on the Marathas destroyed in their turn. So that is how the period was very tormented one for the people living in that area. Now, going back to the year 1140 of the Common Era, Salsette was there under the rule of a few Hindu dynasties who came from Gujarat actually. And they continued various dynasties, small parts, they kept fighting amongst each other, and for a few hundred years, at least 200 years, these small dynasties continued ruling over that region. Until the 14th century, when you find the ruler of the Delhi Sultanate, Alauddin Khilji, coming down to the Deccan, taking Devgiri, and then following it up with further invasions which his generals took forward. And therefore, the entire area, entire Konkan, for example, went under the Sultan of Gujarat, who was again a tributary who later on came up in that region. So, with this introduction, I'll just start with showing you which are the places in which the Portuguese were having their centers of power. It was in the year 1500 when the Portuguese came to India, as per the words of the famous explorer Vasco da Gama, in search of Christians and spices. From Kochi they came to Goa and then moved further north. They took Daman, Chaul, Diu and Vasai. The island of Salsette and Bombay were also under them. All these places they built forts, and as the first European power in India, they brought guns that were the most powerful seen at that time. The English, of course, came much later, in the 17th century, second half of the 17th century, where they received the island of Bombay as a dowry for Portuguese princess Catherine. And they had a disagreement with the Portuguese whether Salsette was a part of that dowry or not for a long time, and they kept claiming that Salsette actually belonged to them. It was the 17th century actually when the reaction against this rule of, by that time already it was well entrenched for 150 years. When Chhatrapati Shivaji founded the Maratha state and founded a navy in 1657 at Kalyan. And the Portuguese had very little idea what it was going to lead to. In fact, two Portuguese father and sons actually helped to build the first 20 ships for the Maratha navy. The policy of the Marathas was always to end the religious persecution of the Hindus who were living in this area. Towards this, they fought wars with the Mughals, the Adil Shahi, the Siddhi, and the Portuguese. Notably, they didn't have much of a tiff with the English compared to the other four powers because the English were much milder in their efforts of proselytization. The battles between the Maratha power and the Siddhi, the Firangi, and the Mughal went on during the reigns of Chhatrapati Shivaji, Chhatrapati Sambhaji, and even later. We notice how the Mughals, the Adil Shahi, both withered away, leaving the Marathas with the Portuguese and the Siddhi of Janjira, both in the Konkan, as their prime enemies and who used to harass the local populace. Now the Firangis had a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. And the northern kingdom, if you see here, is the region north of Bombay, which included Bassein, which included Salsette, which included Dadra, Daman, and Diu. And they all acquired different times of which are all given there. And the southern was at Chaul, which was south of Bombay. And of course, the main center, which was Goa. So this was their extent of their spread on the western coast. And the Siddhi, of course, centered at Janjira. And he held several forts in that area, like Kanjan Vale and Govardhana, which were also under the Siddhi, which were like the two arms of Janjira. And all these people together, the people living there were continuously persecuted. And that is why a lot of time of Chhatrapati Shivaji as well as Chhatrapati Sambhaji was spent in Konkan fighting with these four pas. Which brings me to the further from 1720, when actually 1707 Aurangzeb died, and after a short period of transitional period between 1707 and 1720, there was again a chance to go into the Konkan, and Bhiwandi and Kalyan were captured, and the Marathas began governing that area. And at that time, when they had Firangan was their neighbor kind of thing, the northern Firangan, these two brothers, Bajirao Peshwa and his brother Chimaji Appa, they were at the helm of affairs, and repeatedly there were requests made to them to intervene in the way the Portuguese were treating the local people. But this period was also a very busy one for the Marathas, because this was not the only concern which they had at that time, and they were busy expanding their kingdom northwards primarily. So the first campaign you find they had was with the Nizam in 1728 at Palkhed. Immediately after that you find Chimaji Appa goes on his own expedition and to Malwa, where he defeats and kills the Mughal governor there. And these matters were on a higher priority somehow or the other than what was happening in the Konkan. The 1733 was a very significant year because that was the year when Baji Rao went on the expedition to the Konkan, defeated, reached almost to Danda Rajpuri, just opposite Janjira. And it was the death of Sekhoji Angre, which kind of put a spanner in the works, and they could not proceed further with the attack on Janjira proper. And that was a time when one of the Siddhis, Siddhi Saath his name was, he became a thorn in the side of the Marathas. There was an old story actually behind it that in 1727 there was a Swami called Brahmendra Swami. Now this man was considered a guru by the entire Maratha nobility from the Chhatrapati downwards. And he had built a temple of Parshuram in Konkan at Chiprun. There is a story in which the Siddhi had asked for an elephant from the south. The elephant didn't reach him. He thought the Swami has done some mischief. And he goes and destroys the temple of Parshuram at Chiprun. That was in 1727. So this man, Brahmendra Swami, carries a vengeance against Siddhi Saath. He curses him that you will be destroyed. He leaves the Konkan and comes and stays in Satara at a place called Dhawadshi for the rest of his life. And there he keeps urging Chhatrapati Shahu and the Marathas that please go and punish this man. Somehow the Shahu also starts getting impatient that none of my chiefs are heading towards the Konkan to teach this man a lesson. And you find that this happened in the year 1736 because from his stronghold, Siddhi Saath emerged, went to the northern side and attacked the possessions of Mahanaji Angre, whose headquarters were in Kulaba. In fact, there's a fort called Revas. It's an island. He attacked Revas, captured it, and 500 of the garrison who were there, he put them to the sword, killed them all after they had surrendered to him. When Chimaji Appa at Satara heard that Siddhi Saath has emerged and he has gone to North Konkan, is fighting with Manaji, he quickly descended into the Konkan. Siddhi Saath had no idea that Chimaji Appa is coming. And before he knew it, in a frontal battle, Chimaji had managed to not only defeat Siddhi Saath, but one of his men, one man called Surve, he went and even killed Chimaji Appa, killed Siddhi Saath in that battle. And Brahmendra Swami, of course, was very pleased, and he said that you have killed a demon like Ravana. That's what his letters to Chimaji Appa at that time says. So this reduced the power of the Siddhi, and that actually was a key moment because now he did not have two enemies to face who could combine and whom he had to face in the Konkan area. Siddhi Saath's power was, the Siddhi's power was reduced considerably, and there was only one enemy to consider, and that was the Portuguese in the northern Firangan, which is from Bandra right up to Daman. So there are two families whose contribution to the entire campaign must be mentioned. One was the Anjurkar family. Now, this Anjurkar family took, for several years, they had been after the Marathas to come down and evict the Portuguese from that region. Sometime later, you find that Antaji Kavle, another person living in that region, again, he approached the Peshwa. Several petitions were sent that come down here and do something because we are suffering and we are not able to live our normal lives. So finally, it was decided that with the death of Siddhi Saath, Chimaji was free of an adversary and he could take up the campaign of Salsette. Now, it was not as if nothing else was happening at that time. In 1737 was the year when Baji Rao went to Delhi. And in the very week that Baji Rao was in Delhi, in the end of March 1737, the campaign for Salsette started under Chimaji Appa. Now, a bit about the geography of the region, because it's very confusing. These words have all gone out of vogue, Salsette and so on. So this will show you where we are right now, at least the region till the Vasai Creek we can see from here. And so this is Bombay, so the small island which you can see here. And it would have remained like this had this island of Salsette not been taken over. And beyond this, this is the area where Vasai is located. On the opposite, this fort called Dharavi or Dongri. So this fort was right opposite the creek from Vasai, not to be mixed up with the other Dharavi in this region. And on this side, the small water channel where there is a fort or Thana. This side on the coast was the forts of Warsaw or Vasai as it was called. Bandra, of course, we know it is right opposite the fort of Worli here. Dharavi is here. Belapur is on the other side. Panvel, Karanja on the other side of Bombay Harbour, and Kalyan. So these are the significant places which were relevant in the campaign for Battle of Sashti. And this geography we should keep in mind whenever we discuss the topic after this. This is another map which will show you that this is Bombay again, Bandra, Arabian Sea, Warsaw, Dharavi, and Dongri is another place there. This is an island actually. Vasai is here, Thane, the mainland, and this was Kalwa, from where they could easily cross across because it was a very narrow channel. And then this side you come to all these four, Elephanta, Hog Island and so on, Karanja, and the mainland over here. So this was the giraffe geography of this place. Now note the water channel near Thane. While these forts were very well established around Salsette, in 1732, Salsette had a new governor. His name was Louis Botello, and he decided that he will convert the entire population of Salsette during the time that he was the governor there. When Bajirao Peshwa heard of this, he wrote to him that to desist from such a venture and not do such a thing. And because of the threat that the Marathas might intervene in case he tries to do something like this, he first decided, I must fortify the island of Salsette in a manner that the Marathas will not be able to come inside into my island. That is the time in 1732 he started building the fort of Thane. And the fort of Thane was, if had it been completed, it would have been, the whole island of Sashti would have been foolproof from attacks with the Maratha Navy. A very remarkable part of this entire campaign of 3 years, you'll find, is that the Maratha Navy is nowhere to be found in this entire campaign. Manaji and Sambhaji Angre, who were looking after Kolaba and Vijayadurg, did not participate in this battle at all. And therefore, the battle had to be entirely fought by the land forces. That made it doubly difficult because the Portuguese could continue getting provisions for their forts from by sea, either from Goa, or if the Salsette was attached, they could get it from Vasai, and so on. So, the other point to notice is a small fort of Dharavi, which is opposite Vasai, because that guarded the water channel at that point. Now, from 1720 onwards to 1734, it is not as if efforts were not made. At different times, smaller forces went and tried to take Sashti, tried to take Vasai, but they failed at each and every time. And therefore, when this fort started getting constructed, of course, it was with heavy taxation and the free labor of the people, local people there, who were forced to work on the building of the construction of the fort. You find the fort is very peculiarly built in that there are 3 large towers here on this side. This today is Thana Jail. So because of its Thana Jail, you can't visit it, and a lot of alterations have taken place since then. But these stars give you an idea that there are 3 large towers on the landward side, and towards the water channel, which is over here, there are only 2 small towers. The reason is that they started running out of money, and therefore they decided that we'll make smaller towers and do it with lesser amount of money. And therefore these small towers were built on the water side. Now these maps, of course, we are going to revisit whenever we start further talks about the actual campaign. So the first part which the Marathas were watching from Kalwa and Kalyan and these places was the fort of Thana, because that was the easiest point to enter just now. In fact, when the sea, when it was ebb, it was easy to even walk across that sea channel in those days. So that was the point that they were looking at. And therefore, in March 1737, the Marathas made their first move before the towers of the Thana fort could be completed. And it was a day of Gudi Padwa, 24th of March 1737, when Chimaji Appa left Pune and came down to Kalyan. Actually, he stayed at Badlapur, near Kalyan. And his men who were there, he asked them to go ahead and collect people to cross over the water channel and attack Thane. So to show the Portuguese that no people are being collected for the army, they arranged a Gondhal. A Gondhal is a kind of a festival meant to propitiate Bhavani Mata. And therefore the Portuguese are they're just having one of their festivals, so they all collected there for the Gondhal, and they didn't take it very seriously. And soon enough, of course, on the 26th, they did one more thing, that they spent 5 rupees to buy a lot of liquor, and they sent people to give the guards and the Geronimo Tower, which is towards the water side, which was being completed. They gave them this liquor for free. And all the guards there very happily got drunk that night. And when they were drunk, on that night, the Maratha army crossed the creek, put ladders on the incomplete tower, climbed the tower and took over the fort. And to signify that the fort had been taken over, they fired 2 cannons. And the noise of this was heard in Badlapur by Chimaji Appa, who knew that the Thana fort has been taken. It was also heard by Louis Botelho, who was somewhere else, and he realized that the Marathas have come here. There's one description which says that after taking the fort, they danced around the fort like ghosts in a Marathi paper. There's a convent nearby which they burned down, and gradually they started spreading out into the rest of the Salsette island. And Chimaji entered Salsette on a time when the low tide. It is saying that there was muck over there, wet mud. So rice, when it was after it has been harvested, the grass of that rice, the hay, he put that hay on the mud, on the wet mud, and crossed the channel and entered Salsette. Now Botelho was shocked to find that the fort of Thane has been lost. And he first approached the English for help, which the English refused. And Botelho suddenly lost his nerve, and he fled from there to Uran. And the rest of the people fled to Vasai. So the Marathas formed two armies at that stage. One was formed by a leader called Khandoji Mankar, whom you will hear very often in Sashti and Thane. He was looking after Thane for a very long time. And the second was Honaji Balkaude. An army under these two people was sent into the island of Salsette to capture Warsaw, Bandra, and all the other places which were there in between. And the second army which was formed was by Shankaraji Keshav Phadke and some others who went towards Vasai. So these two armies started going in two different directions to capture both these places. Now this picture of the Thane fort is taken much later, in 1782, when the sketch has been made. And so this is how these two armies started moving. Now the English, they heard that the fort of Vasai, fort of Thane has fallen. And in one of the committee meetings, there are minutes written where they say, it may have been hastened, the fall of Thane may have been hastened by the well-grounded complaints of the Gentoa brethren. Gentoa brethren are the Hindu brethren under the Portuguese government, who have made frequent examples of the cruelty of their inquisition, which hath been exercised upon these unhappy subjects with great severity, ignorance, and superstition. A process more impolitic, as they were destitute of real strength to protect themselves in the exercise of it. They said it was foolish of the Portuguese to be so rigorous in their inquisition when they didn't have the strength to really protect themselves if an invasion comes from the Marathas. So that was the English comment at this stage. Now these are highly detailed maps of the entire northern Firangan, which I don't know how much you can see, but on the left side, this is the northern Firangan from Vasai to Daman. Daman is on the top over here and Vasai at the bottom. So this is the entire region. And you'll find a string of forts here which are there. Tarapur is here. Mahim is here. Now this present Mahim which you see in Bombay, this original Mahim lies here, not the one which you have in Bombay. It was later on when the first Hindu king of Mahim, who set up his capital there, was displaced from there and he came to Bombay Island. He named another place here as Mahim. So there are two Mahims here. But this Mahim also is a very strong fort. There is an island fort of Arnala, and the southern side you find from Mahim downwards. This is Vasai here. This is Vasai. Arnala fort is here, and this is the island of Sashti as it existed at the time with Thane, Warsaw, Dharavi here, and the fort of Bandra here, and of course the small tiny island of Bombay, which is all that the English had at that stage. So Warsaw and Bandra forts, after capturing Thane and the Marathas spread out into the Salsette, Warsaw and Bandra remained to be captured. The attacks on Warsaw on the very second day, 27th of March, and Bandra, however, did not quite succeed because the local captains there very ferociously fought back. Warsaw, in fact, was a very deep water port. Big ships could enter that port at that time. Therefore, it was considered very valuable by the Marathas. But the captain there resisted furiously. The Marathas put ladders on the fort, tried to climb up. But when they were reaching the top, they were shot down. Several people were killed. And in fact, Honaji Balkaude was very disheartened to see that the way he lost 50 or 60 people in the attack on Warsaw. And then, because Warsaw could not be captured, he went and joined Khandoji Mankar at Bandra. Bandra fort again was a very, for a month this siege was going on at the fort at Bandra. And the English also from the other side gathered their forces on Worli and other places on the other side of the water line. And it is said at one stage there were 125 to 150 warships in that small creek between Worli and Bandra Fort. So it was very difficult to take it at that stage. Therefore, Bandra and Warsaw were somehow not taken at that stage. But Santa Cruz was taken. It had a small fort there, so that was taken. Then Belapur was the other fort which was taken, which is the other side of the water body in the mainland. That was taken after a month of severe fighting and at close quarters which they had to fight. Marol was taken, Parsik was taken. There are many other places in that region called, like the Jivdan fort is there, Mandvi is there, Firangi Pada is there, Takmak is there, Manor is there. All these areas north of Vasai were also taken. Now Dharavi was a very special place because that was a place from where Vasai could be supplied whenever it required anything. Dharavi was right opposite and they could supply, and they also could control ships entering the harbour. So if Dharavi was in Maratha hands, it would make a difference because the ships which come from Goa to supply Vasai would not be able to enter that creek. So Dharavi Marathas took it in the very next month, in April 1737. But before they could really reinforce the walls, there was a command, the governor of Vasai was a man named Kardin, who had replaced Bothello when he ran away to Uran, and he personally led an attack and recaptured this fort on the 14th of May 1737. So within a month, it went back to the Portuguese. And again in the monsoons, you find the Marathas make another bid and again take back this fort. So the fort of Dharavi kept changing hands several times. Now, while all these things were happening over here, another crisis emerged, and that was when Bajirao had gone to Delhi and he was on his way back. The Delhi Mughal emperor called the Nizamul Mulk to Delhi to oppose the increasing invasions of the Marathas towards the north. And Nizamul Mulk went to Delhi. He was honored, he was made the Wazir, he was given a strong army and told, go down south and put Bajirao in his place. Now the Nizam had already lost to Bajirao once in 1728 at Palkhed. So he started coming downwards and he told his son, who was in the south, in Aurangabad, that you come from the other side. Now Bajirao started moving northwards, and somewhere near Bhopal, the Nizam and Bajirao came face to face. Realizing that Nasir Jung would come from the other side and hold Bajirao between the two armies, he told Chimaji Appa to leave the campaign at Salsette and Vasai and come and help him and block Nasir Jung from reaching his father. Therefore, you find Chimaji Appa leaving the campaign at Salsette, going to a place called Varangaon, which is between Aurangabad and Bhopal, and standing there, preventing Nasir Jung from coming out of Aurangabad. Nizam, when he approached Bhopal, he saw that he was waiting for his son to join him. When he saw his son is not coming out, he ducked into the fort at Bhopal, with a huge lake behind it. And he felt that in Palkhed he was defeated because he had no water and no food. He thought, with so much of water here, I'll be able to survive. But there again, the siege was so strong that they ran out of food and he had to kind of surrender. They tried to make a breakout, which didn't succeed much, and he had to sign a humiliating surrender. But during this entire period, for nearly 6 months, you find that Chimaji Appa had to stay away from this campaign at Salsette. And after this, he went back to, and of course, Chimaji was a known patient with several chest-linked diseases, whether it was asthma, whether it was tuberculosis, we don't really know, but it was already there at that time. Then June and September 1737, when Chimaji was not there, Shankaraji Keshav Phadke once again tried to capture Vasai twice. But he failed because it was a very strongly fortified fort. And therefore, because he found it very difficult to attack Vasai, he diverted the Maratha attack to Daman. And his brother Mahatji, his elder brother, he attacked Mahim. Now Mahim, there was a new general, a very intrepid Portuguese general called Pedro de Melo, who had just come to take command at Vasai. And this man, he came to Mahim, and over there he attacked this place where Mahatji was stationed, and they attacked the Marathas. Mahatji was killed, and several other important Maratha chiefs like Ramchandra Haripatwardhan and so on, they were also injured. And then he chased the Marathas out of Mahim all the way to Asheri. Asheri is another very important fort in the heart of slightly inland from Vasai, but surrounded by thick jungles and hills. So Marathas had laid a siege to that fort. They had to leave it and run away further. And a triumphant De Mello returned to Vasai after having defeated and evicted them from these places. However, Thane was not lost, and therefore much of Sasti was remaining. It was the peripheral forts around Vasai that were lost at this stage. So Chimaji returned. This is of course the front of the Vasai fort, but the attack, this is the southern side of the Vasai fort. But the northern side was where the Marathas actually attacked from. So once Chimaji returned in January 38, but for the next 6 months, there was not much that the Marathas could really achieve. Pedro de Mello and the governor Cardin had taken back many places won by the Marathas in 1737 itself. However, Thane was retained by the Marathas. Now, de Mello and Cardin took back even Dharavi on 17th February 1738. And in March, a Maratha attempt to take back Dharavi failed. So Chimaji writes to his nephew Nana Sahib, who became the Peshwa later on, the anguish due to Dharavi is so intense because he could feel it that I am not able to, unless I take Dharavi, I cannot start the campaign on Vasai. And Cardin, the governor of the region, wrote that already 12,000 Marathas had lost their lives, but they kept throwing more men into the campaign. So very often you find Vasai battle being described as a Dharma Yuddha, because the people were so impassioned when they go into the battle that they did not care for their lives. Climbing the ladders, going ahead, one person gets shot, the next man comes and takes his place. Hundreds were killed in any attack on any of those forts. But while the attacking party always loses more people than the defenders, but it was the superior weapons and the strong fortifications of the Portuguese forts which actually deterred the Marathas, and that is why they could not really capture these places and they had to lose a lot of manpower. Then help was asked from Goa, but Goa could not help them. So Cardin resigned his post and de Mello took over from him. Now Chimaji's health went down, monsoons were coming, and you find in May 1738, he again goes back to Pune for rest. And there was a lull in the fighting in the monsoon months because anyway nothing much can happen at that time. Now Vasai fort, if you see the geography of it, it is protected by nature actually. Because look at it, on this side is the Arabian Sea. Those days the forts were made in a particular manner that the east was on top, the west was at the bottom. So you have to look at it from that point of view. So this is the Arabian Sea, this is the Thane Creek, the Vasai Creek, and then there's a water channel which goes on the side over here, which is actually a marsh. And it has got two small rivulets which had to be crossed, which are again very marshy, and where the Portuguese used to keep their thanas or their posts to guard anybody from coming to the north side. The only unprotected side of Vasai was the northern side. Of course, far beyond here somewhere there was the Vaitarana river was there, but that was far away. So if anybody had to attack Vasai, he had to come from the northern side. Now the problem was that the whole number of all the trees in this area had been cut off. And the guns mounted on the bastions at Vasai, about 110 in number, were pointed towards any invader coming from the north. And therefore, it was very difficult to approach them from the sea because the Marathas did not have a navy at that stage which came here. It was difficult to attack from the creek because Dharavi was still with the Portuguese. And this marshy area, they had to cross two rivers and come to the northern side, which they did at great cost because they had to get rid of those. Some people have even swum across those rivers for which gold bangles were given immediately as gifts to them for doing this kind of heroic deeds. So a lot of these things happened. And finally, de Mello was actually overreached himself because he was not happy with just having taken Dharavi. He thought, I must make a bid on taking back the fort of Thane itself. So 1,000 troops had just come from Portugal. He put them all in ships and he went around the island of Bombay, through the Bombay harbour as we know it today, and from behind he approached Thane. And when he reached there, he realized that his guns could not reach the fort. So he got off the ships and started going by land to approach the fort over there. And Khandoji Mankar from the fort started firing when he saw that some people are trying to attack the fort. And one of those bullets struck this man, Pedro de Mello, and he was killed. And this loss of Pedro de Mello was a big setback for the Portuguese at that time because he was the man who was actually winning the battles for them at that stage. And then the Marathas decided that we cannot just have supplies coming from Goa while we are attacking Vasai. So Venkatrao Ghorpade, who is the brother-in-law of Bajirao Peshwa, who was at Ichal Karanji, he was told to lead an army and attack Goa itself. And the very first attack he made, he took the city of Madgaon, he took Bardez, and he brought the viceroy of the Goa region to such a state that not only did he have to sign a treaty of whatever terms the Marathas dictated, but he also wrote a letter to Vasai that please consider surrendering on honorable terms and give up that fort, which the commandant of Vasai took a lot of affront that how can you give us such advice? We are not going to give up the fort so easily. And therefore the Battle of Vasai dragged on even further, though Goa was not really helping them in any way. Now in the Second World War, you find in the Pacific, the Americans followed a principle called island hopping. Rather than attacking Japan directly, they used to take the small islands in the Pacific and gradually move towards Japan. The Marathas did something like this because Vasai itself had a lot of smaller forts around this. And therefore Chimaji, Pelaji Jadhavrao and Shankaraji Phadke, they first decided to go for the smaller places around Vasai and finally encircle Vasai from all sides. So that was the only place left to be attacked. So first they attacked Mahim, and which was captured very early in 1739, 9th of January, Mahim was captured. Then Tarapur, which is further north, was a very tough battle because it was a very strong fort, very well defended by the Portuguese, and it had very strong stone walls. Now once the campaign with the Nizam had got over, the entire Maratha army, Mallara Holkar, Ranoji Shinde, they all came down and joined the main Maratha army in this region. And Mallara Holkar with Chimaji and some others like Baji Bhiurao, they went and attacked Tarapur. Now Tarapur, a fierce battle took place. Finally, mines had to be laid. Mines are basically explosives which are put under the wall of the fort, and a long fuse is buried under the land, under the soil, and lit. So when it explodes, the wall kind of gives way and there's a breach through which the army can enter. So they started mining the walls, and gradually and they also started putting ladders, trying to climb up. All kinds of things were going on at the same time. And eventually the fort wall was blown up one of the miles, and 24th January a breach was created in the fort at Tarapur. Now one very important chief at that time was Baji Bhiurao Retrekar. In fact, his name was Bajirao and his brother's name was Chimaji, same like Bajirao Peshwa and Chimaji Appa. And they were very close to these two brothers. Baji Bhiurao was near the walls of Tarapur when he was killed. And you find Bajirao later on writing to Baji Bhivrao's mother that I am your Bajirao. And he died for a worthy cause, but henceforth consider me as your son and I am your Bajirao. Also there are a lot of families, Firangi families inside the fort. And all these families also had to the captain was killed and his wife and other ladies were all had to surrender, and they were treated very honorably by the Marathas. Chimaji Appa, in fact, when the captain's wife told him, please give my husband a very decent burial, he was buried with full honors at that time. So all this was mentioned at the way he treated these surrendered people. After Tarapur, they went further to the central fort of Asheri. Now Asheri again is a very difficult fort to capture because not only is it surrounded by hills, it's at a height, a lot of thick jungles around that region. And that was again captured very easily because the momentum was with them. On 3rd of February 1739, you find that Asheri has fallen to them. Warsaw, which had been resisting capture from 1737 onwards, was captured on 9th of February 1739. The Marathas came in overwhelming numbers. And everything that Chimaji had at his disposal, he threw it in this battle in the Firangan. Now, finally, the Vasai was encircled. When all these places were taken, you find that Vasai was the only capital left, and Marathas, when they came from the northern side, it was walls 40 feet high. Like at that time, the Bombay castle had walls which were only 11 feet high, 40 feet high, 5 feet thick, and a perimeter of nearly 3 kilometers, bounded by water on 3 sides. Open area was only to the north. Then there were 2 small rivulets called Rajavali and Gokhivre, 2 small towns on these rivulets which had to be crossed. The soil was very loose because it's a seaside. So mines were difficult to lay because all the force of the mines when they exploded used to get dissipated in the sandy soil over there. So all these problems were there. Now, one of the commandants at Vasai was a man named John Pinto, and he desperately pleaded for help from Bombay, again which did not come. So one day when he was surveying the Maratha positions from one of the Vasai bastions, he was killed by a bullet that hit him in the throat. And then he gave way to another officer named Caetano D'Souza. Now again, appeals to Bombay kept increasing that please give us help. We are about to lose the fort of Vasai. And the English demanded hard cash. We will give you help, but you want hard cash. So eventually the Firangis mortgaged the plate in their churches and the brass cannons which they had with the English to get some kind of money from them. So this was because the English did not want to have any part of this battle. They didn't want to take any kind of panga, if you want to call it that, with the Maratha power, which was so powerful at that stage. Finally, 7th of February 1739, you find Chimaji reaches the north face of Vasai. Now, to give you an idea of the kind of mobilization which the Marathas had carried out at that time, he brought along with him 25,000 horse, 40,000 people on foot, 5,000 camels, 50 elephants, along with several Pindaris who were accompanying them. So a huge army, about 20 to 30 times the size of the defenders in the fort at Vasai, had descended on that place. And still the Portuguese refused to surrender. 38 guns were mounted by the Marathas to fire at the walls of the fort, and the shells did not really make an impact on the strong walls there. The Firangis had 110 guns on their bastions, and only 3 of the bastions had to be defended by the Portuguese, which you see on the northern side. These are the 3 bastions, 2, 3 and 4. One is the Saint Sebastian bastion, number 3 is the Cavalier bastion, and the 4th is the Remedios. These 3 bastions were the only ones to be defended because the other bastions they could not attack. So the entire fire was concentrated on these 3 bastions and the wall between them. And today you find the road which goes through Vasai goes between this number 3 and 4. If you visit Vasai today, that's how you enter the fort today. So this with 110, anybody approaching the fort at a fair distance had to be subjected to very strong Portuguese fire from these, and therefore hundreds of people were killed in just trying to lay the mines. They raised batteries on which they could mount the guns. Now the Portuguese said that some of these batteries which were raised, they called it Dhamdama, it was called, were almost as high as the walls of the fort itself, so 40 feet high. And while erecting those batteries, innumerable people were killed by the unrelenting fire day and night from the bastions of the fort. Finally, the sandy soil did not allow them to put their mines so easily and light them, because the sandy soil would dissipate and how do you reach the fort wall? So under cover of fire, under cover of of the night, they used to creep towards the walls. They used to dig a trench in which they used to put the fuse and have bamboos on 2 sides on which they used to put a roof. So it was a kind of a tunnel through which the fuse used to go. And finally they had to dig under the walls to lay the mines there, and then they had to be fired, and then they could expect that a breach will be formed there. So this activity continued for a long time, and this nearly 200 meters of open ground had to be covered before you could approach the Vasai fort. And the only way to enter the fort was if you can breach the wall. And everybody enters through that because it is impossible to get rid of the firepower which they had. So after De Mello died and John Pinto was the commander, was shot by a Maratha gun on the 4th of April also, the Goa Viceroy again asked them to surrender. Take a honorable way out and surrender. However, again they refused. And the situation became more and more desperate. Finally, they succeeded in Mallara Holkar, Ranoji Shinde, their people. They finally succeeded in having covered tunnels through which they put these mines, and about 10 mines they could lay under these 3 towers and the walls of the fort. And again, there was a new commandant who had come, a man named Silveira. He was killed in the firing on the 2nd of May. So there are no other forts from which they could get sustenance. The English refused to give them help. Goa was advising them to surrender. The Marathas were coming closer and closer, and the 3rd commandant was killed there. And by that time, the mines had reached the fort walls. And out of these mines, first 3 of them were lit and they set fire, and one of them created a breach in the Remedios tower at that time. And immediately a breach was created. A whole lot of Maratha troops rushed into that tower without realizing there is another mine about to explode. And the second mine would explode. A whole lot of them were killed in that also. So whenever a breach was created in the fort, what the Portuguese did is they brought huge logs of wood and they put them in this breach and they set fire to it so nobody could enter through that. And in another place they used to put their grenadiers in the second breach so that people cannot enter from there. But soon, after the Sebastian Tower and the Remedios Tower, the third tower to breach was the Carvalho Tower, and a massive hand-to-hand fight began at that point on the 3rd of May, 1739. And that night, the Portuguese got together and they thought that now preserving this fort after these 3 breaches have been created is a near impossibility, and it's time for us to surrender. And on 4th of May, when the Marathas began their attack, somebody came out with a white flag of surrender and the fort was surrendered. It had been a long and costly war for the Marathas. Finally, they succeeded in evicting the Portuguese. The treatment of the Portuguese by Chimaji Appa has been mentioned by several sources. In fact, his own letters also mention it, that everybody who surrendered was allowed to go back honorably with their possessions. Ships were given to them. If they didn't have them, they were sent off to Bombay and Goa. And they went out of the fort with their band beating. So a fallen or a surrendered enemy was treated like Chimaji Appa in his letter always says that we fight a battle like the Bharati Yuddha. Bharati method of that we do not kill a surrendered or a defenseless enemy. Significantly, this was also the first time in history actually that an Asiatic army had defeated a European army. It predated the Martand Varma's defeat of the Dutch by about 2 or 3 years in Kerala. So this is the first time you find that an Asiatic army had defeated a strong European imperial power. Chimaji, when he wrote back to his brother, he was very complimentary to his enemy. He says the Firangis fought like true soldiers. Our men fought in accordance with the tenets of the Bharati war. There have been many battles before this, but none can be compared to this battle. It is all due to the Swami's blessing. This is a letter written to Brahmendra Swami, so he is giving him credit for it. Our people would not leave the towers. Finally, the fanatic Firangis lost courage, and on the day of Ashtami, they sought a truce. The Maratha army never had a war like this one. It was the extreme limit. It is difficult to expand on it any further. To win this fort was God's grace and Raya's saintly deeds. By Raya, he means Bajirao, of course. So that was the end of the capital, but that is not the end of the story. Because the Marathas held Salsette for 37 years after that. And a lot of things changed during that time. In 1739, the English were worried that now that they have reached Bandra, it's a short hop across to enter Bombay and take over Bombay also. But the Marathas had nothing to, there was no grievance against the English, let's say. Because the English did not those days religious persecution was considered the number one offense, whether it was Adil Shahi, the Mughal kingdom or the Portuguese. Therefore, these are the 3 main enemies that the Marathas continuously attacked. But they had no reason to attack the English. They sent 2 envoys. One came and met Chimaji Appa, one went to Satara, met Shahu, one went to Bajirao and met him. And they did not show any interest in attacking Bombay at that time. Though Bombay was a little panicky that they will attack, let's build a ditch, let's make the walls a little higher and so on. But they had no intention of attacking Bombay at that time. And this letter on the right is a letter written by Chhatrapati Shahu, original letter, which is in the British Library at London, where he says that the English are honest traders. And there's no reason why we should not believe what they're doing and we should have good relations with them. So this letter is written to Chimaji Appa. And the bottom, that scroll which you see, that is in Shahu's own handwriting, where he said, Tumi sudhni asa, you are wise yourself. So this is the attitude the Marathas had towards the English in 1739 when Vasai was captured. But what happened afterwards? In 1773, Narayan Rao Peshwa was assassinated, which I have dealt with in my recent book. And there was a Maratha civil war which started waging between the Raghova and the rest of the Barbhai, the 12 ministers. And while they were busy in this war, stealthily the Portuguese navy started approaching the north, thinking that we will go and grab Salsette for ourselves. And the English preempted them by 1 day and sent their army and their navy to capture Salsette from the Marathas. The campaign took about 20 days, and on 31st of December 1774, Salsette was taken by the English. And what did they tell the Marathas? Why have we taken it? We have chiefly been impelled to this step from a thorough conviction that if it would otherwise fall into the hands of the Portuguese. as from the present situation of the affairs of the Marathas, it must be out of their power to send such force as be able to oppose them. Of course, they said this at that time because they didn't want an open war with the Marathas. They couldn't avoid it. 1775, first Anglo-Maratha war did start. But once Salsette was taken, even at the end of the first Anglo-Maratha war, the treaty that was signed, the English refused to give Salsette back to the Marathas, and therefore, though Vasai remained with the Marathas till 1818, Salsette Island, which is the area from Bandra to Bhayandar and Ghodbandar and Thane, that was taken over by the British in 1774 and remained with them till 1947. Now, had this northern Firangan not been taken in 1737, because both were European powers, the English were not going to attack the Portuguese, it is possible that Salsette and Vasai would have been like Goa in Portuguese hands till 1961. So, the entire cultural milieu would have also changed in the next 200 years that took place. Now, though Salsette Vasai is a very small part of the very fairly large Maratha period and long Maratha history, but Chimaji Appa was the man instrumental actually in fighting and inspiring his men to follow him in exterminating the Portuguese from the region. Now, I have not been able to go into more details than this. We are running out of time. But there was at this very time when Vasai was surrendering, in March 1739, Nadir Shah came and attacked Delhi. And he was actually sitting in Delhi and looting the city when the battle for Vasai was going on. Bajirao Peshwa was sitting at Burhanpur and writing to Chimaji Appa, like he did in 1738 to fight with the Nizam, wind up your affairs quickly and come and join me with the entire army, because I have to go and protect, either go and attack Delhi or I have to protect Nadir Shah, the Deccan from Nadir Shah. But this time Chimaji did not listen to his brother. He said, unless I finish this battle of Vasai, I will not leave this campaign. On 4th of May 1739, the Portuguese surrendered and Vasai was taken over by the Marathas. On the 5th of May, coincidentally, Nadir Shah left Delhi and started his way back to Iran with all the peacock throw and the Kohinoor and whatever loot he had taken at that time. So, at one stage, it is, of course, the Bakhar, where Chimaji tells his commanders that if you can't win this fort, at least put me in the cannon and throw me inside the fort, so at least I can go inside, even my dead body going inside. So that was a passion with which Chimaji Appa had kind of made this determination that I am going to get these people out of here. And that is what actually led to this entire exercise. So I will end here. I'll thank you all for a very patient hearing. And I thank the Asiatic Society for this opportunity once again. And Professor Gargil, I'm sure we'll all look forward to his comments, and let's hear what he has to say about it. Thank you very much.
Hello, hello. 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 Thank you, Dr. Kulkarni, for a fascinating talk. Chimaji Appa is definitely always under the shadow of his elder brother, that is Bajirao, in the annals of Maratha history. And many a times, the Battle of Vasai, the Battle of Shashti is overlooked even in the regional history of Bombay. It's more importantly from the Anglo-Maratha wars that the focus comes. When it comes to the campaigns in Konkan, yes, as you rightly pointed out, and it has been documented in the records of the Maratha state as well as the British, that religious causes did play an extremely important role in leading up to this campaign and eventual victory. But along with that, there were also perhaps maritime interests at play and economic interests at play, because Brahmendra Swami was not just a philosopher, a guide, but he was also an important moneylender to the Maratha state. And it is his also pride which has been hurt when Chipron is attacked, with the Parshuram temple being attacked, and something that therefore a kind of a revenge that has to be taken against the Portuguese, and the Maratha state is unable at one level from a religious point of view and the other level, obviously from the economic point of view, to counter Brahmendra Swami's standpoint. Now, along with that, as you mentioned rightly, there is a conspicuous absence of the Maratha Navy. and it's there in the book, needless to say. But this is an important facet of the Peshwas, the way they handled the Maratha Navy affair. Because when we talk about the Maratha state, we talk about Chhatrapati Shivaji, one of the important aspects of his vision was development of a naval force, which would eventually evolve and strengthen, perhaps go from the shallow water navies or the brown navy to a deep sea navy. That does not happen. You have an internal conflict which results in the destruction of the Maratha naval power, and it is not in a position to challenge the English, or in this case even participate in the Portuguese campaign, something that needs to be talked about. Now, Chimaji Appa undoubtedly stands out, as has been said, as a military commander, as a passionate warrior fighting for a cause. But along with that, another role of Chimaji Appa that has been generally forgotten is the administrative role that he played in the Maratha state. Now, Bajirao was always a campaigner, a person who conquered, who spread the Maratha state just from the western Maharashtra region, trying to create what can be called as a pan-Indian empire or confederacy of sorts. But the administrative mechanism that was put in of the Maratha state, it is Chimaji Appa who played a phenomenal role, not only in establishing the Maratha state's apparatus, the administrative apparatus of this new setup that was emerging, but along with that also the role which I think Dr. Uday Kulkarni has also highlighted in his book on Bajirao and on Nana Sahib, is the relationship that he shared with Nana Sahib. He mentioned a letter that Chimaji Appa wrote at the time of the Battle of Dharavi, I think, to Nana Sahib. So his special relationship in the sense that he was a tutor, he was a person who was guiding Nana Sahib to eventually take up the mantle of leadership after Bajirao's death. And this is also a role that he fulfills after Bajirao's death. He ensures that the Peshwa's Gaddi is bestowed upon Nana Sahib Peshwa. So it is also the administrative aspects of the role which come in, because the letters that he wrote to the commanders in the north to stay to the commitments which we have got from the different kings, and the Malwa position remains strengthened. I think that was immediately a month after Bajirao's death, sometime in June, that he had written to Mahadev Hingne. So that also carries forward another side. So it is not just Chimaji Appa as a brilliant military commander on the battlefields, strategizing, finding ways, going on an island hopping strategy that you mentioned about, but it is also the administrative provision. So if conquests was one aspect, consolidation of an empire is another aspect, where Chimaji Appa played a phenomenal role. In the Konkan, again, the conflict with the Portuguese was not something that emerges only during Bajirao's time. It was a long-standing conflict, perhaps which reaches its logical culmination with the conquest of Vasai. But thank you so much for such a fascinating talk. We are too short of time, so I'll close my comment because there will be many questions. We have a full house, so we'll throw it open for a quick question and answer round. Yes, Commander Kesnur.
Sir, good evening. I just wanted to carry forward what Professor Gadgil has talked about, the lack of participation of the Navy. Now, we've discussed the subsequent events of 55 and 56 separately. But even here, you're talking of 1734, just an immediate post-Kanoji era. And why don't Sekhoji and Manaji, why are they not able to tango with Chimaji Appa and Bajirao? Because you make a mention that both the British and the Portuguese actually use their navy, whether it is in evacuation, whether it is in other things. So why does a navy that defeated the Portuguese and Britishers in 1721 under Kanoji, just about 15 years later is unable to come to the party, so to say? And do you think in some ways that turned out to be a sort of fatal flaw in the Marathas later, notwithstanding their huge heroism otherwise?
The Maratha Navy, of course, was founded by Chhatrapati Shivaji. 1698 onwards, Kanoji Angre was leading the Maratha Navy. 1713, he left the side of Tarabai and came and joined Chhatrapati Shahu at Balaji Vishwanath's prompting. From 1713 to 1729, Kanoji Angre himself was leading the navy, and there was full cooperation of the Peshwa, who was the Prime Minister, and the Maratha Navy. 1729, Kanoji Angre died, and his eldest son Sekhoji took over as the Sarkhel of the... And of course, Sarkhel meant he was in charge of Kulaba as well as Vijayadurg. Now, in fact, Sekhoji was shoulder to shoulder with Bajirao trying to capture Janjira in the campaign in 1733, which Bajirao had come into Konkan. In August 1733, Sekhoji dies, and he is unable to fulfill his commitment of helping Bajirao to capture Janjira. So naturally, Bajirao asks his successor in Vijayadurg, Sambhaji Angre, to come to his help, and Sambhaji doesn't come. Now, not only that he doesn't come, though he's nominated as Sarkhel, he says that my brother Manaji, who's got Kolaba, should also hand it over to me. And therefore, that is when the fraternal quarrel between Manaji and Kolaba, who was the weaker brother, and Sambhaji and Tulaji, who were the stronger side at Vijayadurg, that begins. And that also ends the cooperation of the Vijayadurg branch of the Angres with the Peshwas. In 1735, you find Bajirao coming to the Konkan and patching up between the two brothers, practically dividing the kingdom, that you take Kolaba, you take Vijayadurg, and both of you continue with your whatever you're doing. However, in spite of that, Sambhaji and Tulaji kept attacking Kolaba. And during one such attack, actually Bajirao was that time on the Narmada, he died afterwards. During that time, when the attack came on Kolaba, Nana Sahib and Chimaji Appa had to rush to Kolaba to save Manaji at that stage. And Nana Sahib even imprisoned Tulaji Angre and brought him to Pune in chains, in shackles. And he was released after that at the request of Brahmendra Swami. So the relations between the Vijayadurg branch of the Angres and the Peshwa deteriorated after 1733 to the extent that finally Tulaji had to be brought in chains here. Now, of course, maybe someday I'll give a talk on the 1754-55 episode, where it's popularly considered the Maratha Navy was destroyed. Actually, 50 ships were there, which were tied alongside Vijayadurg, which was, in fact, last talk we had they had mentioned it, it even came in the newspaper the next day, which I was surprised. That it was an English mischief which actually did this. Because Ramaji Mahadev was the Subedar of the Konkan. The day previous to the English attacking Vijayadurg, he went to them and said, Tulaji has surrendered. The aim of the entire expedition was to get Tulaji and put another man in his place, but not by any chance giving Vijayadurg to the English. But the English on the 1st of February 1755 had already decided in Bombay that we will divide whatever money is acquired in Vijayadurg, divide into 8 parts, and this is how it will be distributed. So in spite of Tulaji having surrendered to Ramaji Mahadev, in spite of Vijayadurg also coming back to them, the English said, no, we will still enter the harbour. And if anybody fires at us from the fort, we will fire back. So Tulaji's brother-in-law fired one shell at them, and top of the line ships which had entered, they started firing at Vijayadurg. Next to Vijayadurg is the creek in which all the ships were tied together, in which there was also an English ship called the Restoration. One of the shells fell on these wooden ships and they all caught fire. Nana Sahib was 400 kilometers away at Saunur that time, fighting with the Nawab of Saunur. And Ramaji Mahadev was in charge of affairs in the Konkan. The principle behind this was that there was a Sarkhel in Vijayadurg. There was a prime minister here. The Chhatrapati had, after the death of Shahu, not really been able to exercise his power. And if the Sarkhel does not cooperate with the central Maratha power as it existed at that time, and I say this without taking sides of anybody on ethical or moral grounds, then what use is that admiral? The purpose of the entire exercise, which was building up from 1740 onwards, was to change the possession of Vijayadurg, get rid of Tulaji and put another man in his place. When Nana Sahib came back from his expedition in Saunur, he wrote to the English governor a letter. The agreement was they will get the fort of Bankot and Vijayadurg will be returned to the Marathas. That if you don't evacuate Vijayadurg and give it back to me, then God will be witness to what will happen. And on that one letter, the English evacuated the fort of Vijayadurg and handed it over to the... And the deputy of Tulaji Angre was Durap, who who was actually for the next 30, 40 years, the Dhulap family was managing Vijayadurg, and Manaji and his successors were managing Kolaba. So that is what the real story. Of course, the English Navy became much stronger in the years to come. Well, we were not able to match up to them. So one cannot depend on the ability of a navy revolving around one person. Tulaji was a very brave captain, a very brave admiral. But at the same time, there are several other problems which were cropping up. Like Shankaraji Phadke from Vasai. Now, Peshwa also developed his own navy in Vasai. There are letters by the English who say that the entire aim of the Vasai expedition of the Marathas is to get a good port and establish their own navy. And because of far greater resources and the far greater power of these two brothers, the Maratha navy which is founded at Vasai will be much stronger than the one which the Angrez have. This fear is expressed in a Bombay meeting by the English East India Company. And you find in Madhavrau's time and all, there are long lists of ships of the Maratha navy which existed at that time. But Maratha navy did not keep up with the times, did not technically upgrade itself the way the English did. The Industrial Revolution came up in the second half of the 70s. So a lot of reasons are to be, which, I mean, in one short answer, I am unable to express it. But there are a lot of nuances in this. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, sir.
Hello. Good evening, sir. So my question is that after the capture of the Vasai fort, why did the Marathas not want to remove the Portuguese from India entirely? Why didn't they go after Goa, Daman and Diu, Dardanagar, Haveli? Was there some agreement of coexistence, or what was the reason behind letting them stay?
All Indian battles of the 18th century, if you look at, they end with a treaty, give and take of territory, give and take of some money, certain agreements. I have not found a single instance where the Marathas exterminated an enemy after defeating him. Whether it is a Nizam, whether it is the Mughals, like you find that somebody is imprisoned in a fort and left there for 30, 40 years. No enemy was treated in this manner, killed, his head is cut off after he is surrendered to them. So when they attacked Goa and the Goa Viceroy came and accepted their terms, they signed a treaty and they were satisfied with getting Sashti and Vasai back. And Goa was allowed to continue. So all these pockets all along the coast which remained later on were because they did not finish them off. Now, this can be considered to be a fault of their policy. It can be considered to be they were not ruthless enough. Real politics was not really practiced the way it should have been. So that is what ultimately leads to the fall of a kingdom.
Thank you.
Sir, can you shed some light on Chimaji Appa's personal life? Like we know about Bajirao. You know, his wife was Kashibai, and then he had this with Mastani. A similar way.
Chimaji had married, and his wife was Annapurna. His first wife actually died in childbirth, shortly after childbirth. His son was Sadashirao Bhau, who fought at Panipat. And his second wife, actually, Annapurna Bai, she went Sati with him in 1740 when he died. So there is a Satika Chabutra and Chimaji Samadhi in the Omkareshwar temple at Pune. But other than supporting his brother very loyally, in fact, very often you can call Chimaji as the shield of Bajirao. He made sure that nobody would attack him from behind. And also he took care of the politics at Satara. That there were many people who were inimical to Bajirao, and he took care that these people did not get out of hand, and his brother's interests were protected. So a lot, it's like Ram Lakshman ki jodi, as you call it popularly. So a lot has been done by Chimaji, but he has been overshadowed, as Professor Gadgil says, by his more illustrious brother. And of course, battles and attacking Delhi and all always, it's a far more romantic idea than taking a small city like Vasai or Sashti. But these were very difficult campaigns. And all Chimaji's battles, unlike Bajirao, were frontal battles. Whether he attacked the Subedar at Malwa, frontal battle 3 hours and killed him. Whether he fought with Siddhi Saath, frontal battle killed him. Whether it was a frontal battle with Vasai and Sashti, he did not go around to the encircling and starving out people kind of strategy. He just went and frontally attacked these people. So that was the kind of a difference between the two brothers' approach when they go out to fight an enemy.
Sir, when Narveer Chimaji Appa, he visited Vasai, so were there any families, like native families with Portuguese also, who were supporting Portuguese? Were natives or were Portuguese only a community which was staying in that fort? And natives were with Marathas. Like that, any politics was happening over there?
There are always three kinds of people. Some who are actively opposing somebody, some who are kind of staying neutral, just want to be safe. And the third side who are kind of supporting because they get some temporary benefits from them. So all these kind of people were there. But as I said, Anjurkar and Kaule families are very, they had spies all over the island of Sashti. They had all spies all over Vasai. So before the army actually entered, the spies already made a network and kind of sowed dissension and kind of prepared the ground for the army to enter these places. So their names are not known, but these two families for almost a decade or more, they were at it. And they in fact, Anjurkars actually accompanied the battle with the Maratha armies. They actually went and fought them.
Okay, Anjurkar like.
Yeah.
And regarding, let us like you had said something about Siddhi Sath, who was killed by Chimaji Appa. So where this battle took place?
There's a place called Charai in North Konkan. You'll have to really trace it on the map now. Somewhere North Konkan, because he captured Revas and came south. And somewhere on the way, he was, Chimaji came and attacked him. In fact, Siddhi Sath didn't even know Chimaji has joined Manaji. He still thought he's fighting Manaji till he came face to face with Chimaji's troops. But he continued. In fact, Chimaji writes a very complimentary letter about even Siddhi Sath, that he fought as a very courageous and brave leader.
The Retraker family. Retraker family.
The Retraker family was very, of course, very close to the Peshwa family at that time. And Bajir Bhiurao and Chimnaji Bhiurao, they were two brothers. Both of them participated in the Vasai and Sarshti battles. Baji Bhiurao, of course, was killed at Tarapur. And Bajirao and Chimaji both wrote very sincere letters to his mother about the loss that they had, she had faced. And there's a letter which is published in Marathi documents where Bajirao titled, Meets Tumcha Bajirao, consider me as your son from henceforth. And in fact, they were so close that the Retraker family had named their children Bajirao and Chimaji after Bajirao and Chimaji Peshwa.
Hello, good evening,
Their
sir.
descendants are still around, I mean.
Good evening, sir. Sir, I want to ask a contemporary question. It might be a little out of scope. Two of the personalities you mentioned today, Sambhaji Angre and Chimaji Appa, have been portrayed in Bollywood and Hollywood, both. Have been portrayed? In movies, in Bollywood and Hollywood. Yes, I'll give example. So Chimaji Appa is shown as a scheming person who is more interested in killing Mastani in the movie Bajirao Mastani. And Sambhaji Angre is shown in Pirates of Caribbean. He is shown as a pirate. So there has always been a deep apathy towards Maratha leaders. Why? Because
actually,
that is...
I have not seen Bajirao Mastani. I have not seen Pirates of the Caribbean. I saw part of Bajirao Mastani when it came on TV till Bajirao goes to have a bath. Then I put off the TV. So
Sir,
I don't take them seriously. They are all commercial movies made for earning money. They are not interested in showing you history. If somebody had told Sanjay Leela Bansali Mastani went with Bajirao to Delhi, at least you would have seen the Delhi campaign in the movie. Yeah. So they don't do proper research. Because and they are interested in song and dance, that's all.
So because this is how, when I talk about Chimaji Appa to my friends, non-Marathi friends, they don't see him as a statesman or a warrior. They... Matlab, Saas Bahu serial types.
So this is the problem with historical fiction.
Yeah.
People refuse to admit that Simhagad was named Simhagad before Tanaji Malusre took it. Because Gad Alap and Simhagela was a novel written 100 years back.
Because this is how the people will remember them. So
the idea is to have more lectures, and I hope all of you go out and tell the true story. And books.
Just add to your statement, the idea of Sambhaji being shown as a pirate is essentially an English perspective on the Maratha Navy, which gets reflected then into the popular conception on the Maratha Navy as a pirate-based army. Navy. It's the same thing which was initially considered about the Portuguese from the Arabic perspective. So the Arabs considered the Portuguese as pirates because that's more on the perspectives. I have not seen the movie, so I really cannot comment about how it is shown.
Actually, according to international law, a man can only be labeled a pirate if he is operating on his own account, not if he is appointed by a sovereign king. So the Sarkhel was appointed by the Chhatrapati, and therefore he cannot be labeled a pirate according to even existing 20th century naval law.
Absolutely. I think legally he's got it perfectly fine. But sitting in this very hall, Sohail Rekhi, when he was asked why he did that book on Angre, he said it is because of the pathetic representation of Angre in Pirates of the Caribbean that he was forced to write a book. So what you say is right, but correctives also happen in our popular culture too, if we are able to follow it and set it right.
I would like to ask, what was the contribution of Maratha Navy and which were the other forces? Because there is a huge list. What I would come to know that there were Marathas, there were Kulkarnis, there were Holkars. Everyone was here to liberate Vasai. So there was a kind of spirit in Pune that everyone from Pune, like Plateau region, came in Konkan to. And what was contribution of Maratha Navy in this whole conquest?
Specifically in the Sashti Vasai campaign, the only contribution of Maratha Navy was when Manaji Angre took the fort of Uran. But there is a complaint about it from Bajirao and Chimaji later on, because he did not take it on behalf of Bajirao and Chimaji and the central Maratha power. He took it on his own account and he said, since I have captured it, it is now my property. So there are letters about that complaint from the Peshwa about Manaji Angre having taken Uran and then appropriated it as his own. So that is the only fort which Manaji Angre took.
So we can take one more.
Sir, the British hired the Desi Sipais, native Sipais, to as a foot soldier to fight their battle. So, in the Vasai battle, where the Portuguese also hired native foot soldiers to fight against the Marathas, or the Portuguese right from the Portugal came and fight?
If there is an army of 1,500, there was a corps of about 400 to 500 Portuguese soldiers. The remaining were all local recruits. And that pattern continued finally till the 19th century. All the people who fought for the English in the Second Anglo-Maratha War, First Anglo-Maratha, most of them were Indians. They got better terms, salary on time, pension, looked after when they had injuries. So it made an attractive employment opportunity. That spirit of I'm fighting against my nation didn't exist. And today if somebody in India, for example, takes up a job with a multinational company, he doesn't think I'm working against my country, no? Something like that.
Did family participate in by the name Visaji Pant Lele?
Visaji Pant Lele is of a later time.
Later time, okay.
In Madhurao's time.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Kulkarni. I would also like to thank Asiatic Society of Mumbai, the Mumbai chapter of it, Dr. Nalwala, and all of you who have gathered here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm now going to invite Arun to give the vote of thanks.
Okay, thank you. Actually, any thanks on Chimaji Appa should be very careful, for such an aggressive person to do something wrong in the vote of thanks. That's why Dr. Shehnaz sent me ahead, So anything I say is, is no offense meant. First of all, Dr. Uday and Dr. Gaurav, thank you very much for this insightful thing. In the 90s, in the 80s, we used to listen to cricket. For those people who have listened to cricket in radio, there was Bill Lawry and Richie Benoit talk on, and they used to actually really personify the game, and I think today, Dr. Uday, even if you didn't have and if you hadn't spoken it on radio, we would have visualized the attacks Chimaji Appa, right? The sequence of events, the kind of energy that you put in and the kind of suspense that you created, it was almost like listening to a test match on radio in those days when we should imagine. So really exciting sessions. The story of Chimaji Appa and the kind of, this simultaneous events that you are speaking about, what was happening simultaneously elsewhere, that was really very interesting because nothing is in isolation. And so really appreciate that part. And I think you should start doing your podcast because the voice really resonates a lot. The coming, it's almost sounded like this Andheri Raat Mein, Talwar Tere Haath Mein, and, coming through the fort walls and, all these kind of, the way you described it, it really sounded like that. So really appreciate that. And those people who want to watch the movie Bajirao Mastani, actually when you watch Bajirao Mastani, nobody focuses on Bajirao with Deepika and Priyanka on the screen. So that's not a movie really to focus on Maratha history. And also the part that you really brought about, Dr. Karil, the aspect, we do need a moderator with this kind of energy. Otherwise, probably the session would not have ended, the way you said about the consolidation and the conquest part of it. So we would really like to go on a second session like this sometime in future. We already had one very interesting one in the past. So really thank you very much. And thanks for all the audience. And also the last part, I always tell this, had Chimaji Appa probably stopped at Shasti, and Shasti would have probably come to Bombay, we would have been called the Asiatic Society of Shasti with a very bad acronym called ASS. And today I would be actually requesting you to be members of ASS. It would have been such an embarrassing thing. So I think in one way it is good that Chimaji Appa didn't come to Bombay, didn't make this ASS. We still remain ASM. So, whatever happens for the good. But yeah, that was what I was. And today, if you actually see this, the strategic points that you were saying that Chimaji Appa wanted to conquer this because today, in terms of infrastructure also, I was just imagining we would be talking that, Lodha wants to take this part because it's sort of strategically important to him, and he would take Vasai because Hiranandani is coming there. There would be this, we'd be talking in the same parlance today, this because we have become more of a real estate part than a strategic fortified city. So I think that the same thing has been playing again 400, 500 years down the line, and the wars will continue, only the type of wars probably will change. So with that, thank you very much for coming, and have a great weekend, and see you all soon in the next lectures. Thank you.
I think the vote of thanks was the best part of the entire session.
Sorry, sir?
The vote of thanks was the best part of the whole session.